Hi.
Great. We have vision and we have sound.
Yeah, and I've even got you're even calling me Diane Abbott, which is excellent.
Yeah,
Mm.
saw that. I'm thinking, hang on a minute. not, not quite sure how we got to that one.
Never mind. It could have been worse.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, it could have.
Diane is a great supporter of Disability Labour, so more than happy for
Yeah, you're
that
quite
for
right.
years. Right. Okay. So
Ooh.
thank you very much for coming and meeting with us.
My pleasure. This is a great idea to do this.
Yeah.
It's how we do all our meetings.
Yeah.
We do that way. We cut down on the amount of energy that people have to expend to get wherever we need them to go,
Sure.
and it's cheap as well.
No, absolutely. It's great. It's really good. I'm just going to make the screen a little bit bigger.
Right.
Okay. Oops. What have I done? Okay. Right. That seems to be up and running. Let me just move that. There we go. I'm going to put you in the middle of the screen, just so it looks as if I'm looking at you rather than looking at the.
Okay.
Away from the.
Right. Okay. The format for today is that we will give you 5 minutes to make your pitch on why you want to be deputy leader of the Labour Party and what you would do for disabled members to enable us to be more included in some of the issues within the party. And then we go to 10 questions. I will pass on to Kathy for the first set of questions, and then I will ask the final 5.
Okay.
Would like to start with your pitch, that would be great.
Okay, well, look, thank you very much for doing this. It's a really innovative way to try and communicate with candidates. I'm very grateful. Well, my pitch is very simple. I decided to stand for leader of the Labour, deputy leader of the Labour Party, just because of the result of the 12th of December election is something that we really shouldn't be going through again. I won a marginal seat. I won it in 2010 by 316 votes from the Lib Dems during that period of Clegg mania that you might remember. And then I held my seat in Edinburgh South in 2015 in Scotland when every other seat, all 40 of my colleagues, lost to the SNP. Had the largest majority in Scotland in 2017, and I'm now left as the only Scottish Labour MP left in 2019. I've lost my colleagues again. So not only am I looking for friends, but if anybody's can tell us how we'll get a few more. And the important thing is, though, just mathematically, that a Labour government, a future Labour government, has to run through Scotland. Let me give you just some examples. If we only return one Scottish Labour MP at the 2024 election, if that's when it is, then we'll require to win all the seats that are currently Conservative, down to and including Jacob Rees-Mogg and North East Somerset. That's a 13% swing. That's unprecedented in electoral history in this country. So that's the scale of the challenge that's in front of us. And we have to be honest and from a principled position of what the public were telling us at the election. And they were telling us at the election that they wanted to see the Labour Party change. They wanted to see the Labour Party that was a credible alternative government. They wanted to see a policy platform that had a much greater focus on the future, rather than it just being a manifesto of what looked as if it was giveaways. And they wanted the leadership of the party to be sorted. So I've been saying to people, look, if everyone thinks that we just need one more heave on the same direction, then not to vote for me as deputy leader, because I think we need fundamental change. So the 5 things that I want to do, my 5 pledges, are firstly to bring what I do in South Edinburgh in terms of building that broad coalition of support to the whole of the country. To make sure that we turn the party into the best campaigning organisation we can possibly be. Our role of deputy leader is to organise. That's what I've been doing all my political life, and I think we need to spread that around the country. That will also involve my second pledge, which is to go to the seats that we won, the seats that we lost, even going to the seats that we may never win, and chatting to the public and the Labour movement about what we got wrong and what we need to do to fix it, and to report to conference in September about my findings, whether it be a final report or an interim report. But it's important to speak to people all over the country to find out what went wrong and how we resolve it. So that's a big piece of work to be done in the first 6 months. The third thing I want to do is slightly related to the Scottish issue. Because the Scottish Labour Party requires to deliver Scottish Labour MPs for us to get into government, I want to take on the role of Deputy Leader of taking on responsibility for how we govern Britain in a post-Brexit world. Having a Scot at the top of the UK Labour Party sends a very strong message, not only to all the nations of the UK, but all the regions, that they're important. And I think they told us at the election that they felt the Labour Party wasn't speaking for them, wasn't listening to them, and didn't feel they represented them anymore. And I think sending out that strong message is a very important one. So alongside that, I want to set up a campaign, a Labour campaign for Britain's future, which essentially says, if we believe that the UK matters, which it does, let's win power in 2024 and then give that power away. And that's looking at not just how we advance devolution in the nations of the UK, but actually the biggest problem that we've got is how we govern England as one entity. You know, we have devolution in London, we have Merseyside, we have Greater Manchester, we have a little bit of patchwork of devolution across the country, but we don't really have a proper way forward, and that would be something that I would take on as Deputy Leader. The other thing I want to take on is personal responsibility for all the grievance, discipline and complaints in the party. We should never again have to knock on a door during a general election or pick up the telephone and somebody tells us on the other side of the telephone or on the other side of the door that they won't be voting for the Labour Party because of anti-Semitism. We have to get this out of our party. We have to make sure it never returns, and we have to have a zero tolerance approach to that. So that's my sort of pitch of what we need to do. I've been a fighter and a winner all my life. Tell you a little bit about me. I was born in a housing estate, grew up in a housing estate in Edinburgh called Wester Hales. I grew up in a single parent family after my father passed away very young. My mum was left with just myself and my slightly older brother in 1986 at the height of Thatcherism, when, remember, she was saying there's no such thing as society. That was where it shaped my values. I went to university at 16, first in my family to go. Beyond that, I've worked in the Royal Blind residential homes, a kitchen porter. I've ran my own businesses. I've worked in pensions, all of those kinds of things. So that's pretty much a little bit about me. I was a City of Edinburgh councillor before I became a Member of Parliament. Mm-hmm. And just to give you a little bit about, my views on disability issues. These are really the issue. Policy questions and policy issues aren't really for the Deputy Leader. It's for the whole Labour Party and also for the leadership in the shadow cabinet. But what is quite clear, and where I stand on these issues, is that this current government have been utterly deplorable with how they've dealt with disabled people. They've managed to change the whole narrative in this country away from social security and safety nets and looking after the most vulnerable to talking about welfare and scroungers and those kinds of issues. I think the systems that have been put in place in terms of having to prove that you require support from the state is pretty dreadful. The cuts to disability benefits and to the freezing of disability benefits is pretty dreadful. And all those cuts as well feed through into local government cuts in terms of the support you can get through local services. And really, this government have, without putting too fine a point about it, but without being too melodramatic, they've completely and utterly vilified people who require the state's assistance, and they've killed people in the process. And we need a much more compassionate system. We need a system that responds to people's needs. And the overarching view is that we need to do much, much more as a society to look after the people that need it the most, and that's the disabled people of this country, the elderly, the unemployed, people who come to this country for help. Those kinds of issues are ones that I think the Labour movement need to lead on, and we need to be much more robust about it.
Okay, thank you very much. Kathy, do you want to start with the question?
Yeah, sure. Okay, my first question is, many disabled members have been unable to participate in their CLP hustings because they couldn't attend in person. Will you guarantee to ensure that disabled members or others unable to attend because of caring responsibilities, illness, or disability have postal or proxy votes at all future internal party elections?
I mean, there's a simple answer to that question. The simple answer is yes. I don't know why we don't harness technology as well. I mean, these Zoom meetings could have 20 people on them, all in the room at the same time on a screen that allows them not just to
you can
send a
actually have up to 2,000, which Momentum were doing on their calls during the election.
Ah, well, there you go. So actually, it should be, and yes, I mean, it's about accessibility for disabled people, but it's also about accessibility for other people with, you know, they can't get babysitters, you know, all of that kind of stuff. And it goes back to very simple things, is you could start by having your meetings in a place that's accessible, which would be a good start. And then, you know, it's not without the realms of possibility to have people joining by Zoom and people interacting properly and feeling as if they're part of meetings. So for me, yes, I think proxy voting and postal voting is the right thing to do, but that doesn't really resolve the involvement issue. And we shouldn't really be saying to disabled people, the only involvement you have in the Labour Party is this piece of paper you'll either post or give to someone else to post for you. You should actually be involved in the meetings, and you should be able to vote from where you are at the moment. And I'm sure that's not without the realms of possibility for us to sort deputy leaders responsible for those kind of things. And I can assure you that we'll do everything we possibly can to make sure it happens.
Okay, thank you. Second question. When in government, will you stop the frequent and traumatizing face-to-face interviews for ESA and personal independence payments, PIP?
Yeah, I mean, well, the first thing you say that when in government, that's what we need to try and get to. At this moment in time, we have a 80-seat Conservative majority. We're not able to resolve all of those issues that I have at my surgery every single week, and I'm sure every MP has across the country in terms of issues with ESA, with PIP, with accessing the system, with the way people have been treated. And I think that's something that has to be done. I mean, we don't have a system at the moment that even just has compassion at its heart. It's about saving money. And if you have compassion at its heart, and that's how you design the system, then all of these things do fall away. And we have to be, I mean, the system's also very crude. To determine whether or not someone requires assistance on the basis of whether or not they can walk 20 yards down the middle of someone's office on a Tuesday afternoon because their appointment's at 3 o'clock, doesn't take into account how people live their lives. And many of the cases that I see, people fail, if I can use the term fail, their assessments. And it's only when the medical profession get involved at an appeal that they are granted the support that they require. So it's absolutely right that we have to find a system that is not just much more responsive to disabled people's needs, but is much more compassionate and realises that not everyone's the same and not everyone's condition's the same on every single given day at a given point in time.
Excellent. I guess next one is, will you hold to account the ministers who have overseen the death of thousands of disabled people because of inhumane and degrading Tory welfare cuts and policies?
Well, yes, I mean, we'll be holding them to account every step of the way. The difficulty, of course, is that they have such a big majority in here at the moment, but you just hope that, you know, there's people on their benches that see this too. And I hope that people, disabled people and people requiring help, go to their MPs of whatever colour they are and make the points about how difficult and how inhumane the system is. So absolutely holding them to account. And what I find is pretty disgraceful is that someone like Ian Duncan Smith, for what he's done for the system and what he's done for disabled people, can then be knighted as a result. And these things sicken me, and I know they sicken the disabled community much more.
Yes, thank you. Are you aware of how much money disabled people need per month to have an equal standard of living to those who are not disabled, or what we within the community would refer to as temporarily able-bodied? What would you do to fix this huge divide?
I think I understand your question properly, but I suppose the answer probably goes back to something slightly I said before, because everyone's circumstances are different. And the system is very sort of binary, but everyone's lives and everyone's conditions are different. So we need a much more flexible system that reflects that. So to answer your question about, am I aware of how much money is required? Well, it depends on the individual circumstances. But what we need to make sure is those the resources that are available are increased, that the freezes are lifted, and that people are given the support they require. So I'll just give you a small example. I've got a constituent at the moment who tells me that her income is adequate, but she's not getting the kind of OT support she requires in her house to get a stair lift and a shower conversion that requires her to stay in her home and be comfortable in her own home. So there's a whole plethora of things that are required to be done. One is, yes, money, but on the other side of it, it's about making sure people have the support they require to live as normal a life as they possibly can with the condition that they're living with.
Currently, just to let you know, currently it is, if you just took any disabled person and just who is on any kind of benefits, it's £583 a month more, according to statistics. So with the person who may not need any other kinds of support other than income, we're at least £583 a month less. And then as you start to go forward with what they need individually, it builds from there.
So it's £583 as a sort of baseline, and then everybody adds up to that regardless of what they require.
Yes.
Do you know where that £583 would be had the benefit freeze that was brought in 2010 not been in place? So in terms of sort of,
you could possibly knock something like £50 off that, but probably not
much more.
Because
Okay.
benefits, unlike pension, which has got the triple lock guarantee, there's no triple lock guarantee on any of the benefits, including DLA or PIP. So you just get miles behind.
Well, that sounds like a good policy, doesn't it? A triple lock.
Yeah, and I think also on top of that, the thing is, whatever damage that the Tories do from now until whenever the next general election is, I mean, already Sajid Javid has already said that he's gonna, oh, sorry, we can't do anything about austerity and ending it in the next 4 months as promised. So there is already serious things afoot that are going to put us that much worse. And, I would hope that any of the people who are candidates for deputy leader, whether they get it or not, would work with us and with other disabled people's organizations and through disability labor more widely within our membership to be able to hook you up with everything you need to know to, whether you're successful or not, and still continue to work with us, because I think unless we all kind of bond together, we're never going to get anywhere.
Well, this isn't just a job, as you say, for leader or deputy leader, it's a job for the entirety of the movement, and we need, and I know there's a lot of great work that goes on, but we all have to make sure we're making the same arguments from the same position so we can try and put some pressure on.
Exactly. And my last question is, many disabled candidates fail to get onto both long lists and short lists for council and parliamentary seats. What would you do as deputy leader to ensure that disabled candidates will be included on every long list and every short list?
Well, I think if a disabled candidate comes forward, they should be automatically shortlisted. We do that with all women shortlists, of course. We do that with open shortlists to make sure there's gender balance. We do that in terms of gender balancing our CLP executives and those kinds of issues. So it's not a difficult thing to resolve in terms of making sure that disabled people are represented properly. I think the party's got a big problem in terms of we're resolving the gender issue. I think we're getting there slowly, given where we've been and where we're getting to. I think the issue around Black and ethnic minorities and disabled people is one that we haven't got yet. We haven't got right. So there could be a very strong case to automatically shortlist any disabled person that comes forward. That would be a good start. But it's not just about it's not just about that positive discrimination, if you like. There's got to be a package of measures put in place to support disabled people. And that's about, you talked about being able to attend meetings. Where's the support about making sure you can communicate with members when you're going for a selection? Where's the support around making sure that you can have access to, different IT that you might require if you're partially sighted, or if you have hearing difficulties or mobility issues? All of that has to be taken into account too. One of the things I think is something that I've been looking at for some time is whether or not there is a way of having a proper job share scheme, which many disabled members have actually been in touch with me about, that would take the pressure off disabled members who are going for election or who are subsequently elected from having the pressure of a full-time elected member's role. And I do think there's a very, very, very strong argument for everyone, but particularly disabled people, having that job share opportunity as well. So there's absolutely lots that can be done, and I'm a little bit frustrated and disappointed that hasn't been done already.
Well, thank you for that. And at that point, I'm going to hand over to Fran, and she's going to take up with the next series. So thank you from my side.
You can have a cup of tea now.
Yeah, thank you. I happen to have one here.
Oh, yes, I see that, yes.
Here's one that I made earlier.
Fantastic.
Okay, Ian, I'm going to follow up from that last question. You've almost answered my next question. I know that the scheme in Scotland to support disabled candidates standing for elected office worked really well. I've had lots of good feedback from colleagues in Scotland about how good that was and how supportive that was. Would you guarantee to support a similar scheme in England and actually make sure that the party also provides appropriate funding for candidates?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Scottish scheme has worked rather well, and we had Pam Clancy, of course, in I'm trying to remember her seat now, Glasgow North at the election. Pam stood there twice now. Pam's in an electric wheelchair and got the support not just from our local CLP, but it'd be interesting to get feedback from her about what more support she would require and what more support other people would require. My good friend Mark has stood in Orkney and Shetland before. I think Mark suffers from cerebral palsy, and it would be interesting to speak to people like Mark to see, what are the other things that need to be put in place to make this process not just easier for you, but to make the process easier for everyone else who might want to be involved. So there's lots of work that can be done, and there's lots of learning that we can do. And speaking to people who've been through the process in Scotland might be a good place to start. Pam and Mark are good friends of mine, so I'll bear your question in mind, and next time I speak to Pam, I'll ask her what more support can be put in place.
I think also, sorry, Fran, but I'm currently a local Labour County Councillor.
Oh, great.
And I was very lucky because my particular council, because it's Tory-led, they've saved enough of their budget from social care and other places. But they actually had a team within the councillor services who were very good at putting in push paddle doors for me so I could use my electric wheelchair. They ramped the chamber, and so that they'll do anything pretty much for me. But I have other friends who, because they're active and want to get into politics formally as candidates, or even run for their local disability officer posts, are finding a lot of pushback. And also the fear from the punitive measures of the DWP. They are afraid to stand because of how allowances affect people's benefits with the ESA and work system assessments, work capability assessments. So they're actually afraid to put their heads above the parapet as a person who has benefits. Therefore, it's leaving a lot of voices for those who are in deprivation from actually having any impact on making people see how bad it is for disabled people, other than actions by people, you know, groups like DPAC and other things. So allowances in England, if you're paid an allowance, every councillor gets them.
Yeah.
But if you start from a baseline of there and you use your allowances for paying for travel and so on and so forth, but they also expect you to pay for your taxi journeys and other things that you may need out of that allowance, it's actually unfair that, you know, there's a gap between able-bodied and disabled people.
Your costs
so
are much, much higher.
Yeah, and that's between the fear and the idea that people can't afford to run are two things. We had a mayoral deputy mayor who was being given a lot of trouble because they wouldn't pay for any of her expenses, and with her being on benefits, she couldn't do it. Anyway, that.
Okay.
Go ahead, Fran. Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. One of the main campaigns that Disability Labour was running.
Sorry, I'm going to just.
I'll mute you, Kathy. One of the main campaigns that Disability Labour has got involved with is a joint campaign with ROFA, which is Reclaim Our Futures Alliance, around a national independent living service. So the party manifesto contained a national care service. As disabled people, we want that to go a lot further and give every disabled person the right to independent care within their own home, and making sure that the United Nations Convention on Disabled People, on the rights of disabled people, is enshrined in UK law. Is that something you would support?
Yes, certainly would. And actually, one of the big drivers that we should always support is to make sure that people can be living in their own homes as if they would be able-bodied and not have any disability. And that's something we certainly should do. There's a whole patchwork, of course, at the moment, a postcode lottery of support that you can get right across the country. If that was able to be resolved, then it would make it much easier for disabled people to live at home and to operate properly at home. So absolutely, and we should always put the rights of disabled people into UK law. And indeed, the Disability Discrimination Act was a good step forward in that back in 2009-10, and we need to take that a lot further now, because we need to, I mean, there's a much wider issue, isn't there? There's an issue about changing the narrative that this government's been able to get away with for the last 10 years. And we're not going to get much change out of them in terms of how they treat and how they see disabled people. They see them at this moment in time as a big negative on their balance sheet, rather than it being about human beings and about how people are supported through their lives. So all of that, I think, should be looked at from those first principles. And if it means enshrining the UN rights to disabled people in law, then that's something we should absolutely do. And secondly, the proposals around an independent living service seems to me to be a fantastic idea, and I would like to see how that would work. And if you're able to send me some more information on that, I'd like to read it, if I may.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really happy to send you that. I just going back to your other point about your comrades in Scotland. Could you please give them my email address and ask them to get in contact, because we actually have very little contact with disabled people north of the border, and that's not good. There's no sort of link between Scotland and England at all at the moment, and I'd really like to see some more of that support.
I've taken a little note of that. I'll pass that on to them and get them to get in touch.
Lovely, thank you. How would you, as deputy leader, engage with disabled members to ensure their voices are heard throughout all the structures of the Labour Party?
Well, I mean, it goes back to some of the things that Catherine was talking about in terms of making sure that disabled people are properly involved in the party, and I think that goes back to some of the answers already. But I think your organisation should take a clear role in that. You're an official affiliate to the party, and we have to make sure that all the voices are heard. We do tend to, and it's just a natural thing we do by human nature, we do tend to listen to the ones that shout the loudest. And I think actually groups such as your own have to take a much more active role and be involved much more in how we shape policy and how we run conference, helping us to understand all the challenges that are required for disabled people to be fully involved in the party. And if we want to provide a society in government that is much more conducive to disabled people, we first of all have to start in-house and doing it ourselves and leading by example. So very much want to work with all the affiliates and groups of the Labour Party and really want to learn from you about what we can be doing, what we have to do to make sure that you're as fully involved in the Labour Party as everyone else, and more so.
Okay, thank you for that. I think one of our frustrations has been that the Democracy Review, which went to a conference, said, yeah, we can set up a section for disabled members, and we have got, more than 12 months later, we're still no further on with that, and that's incredibly frustrating. I saw some of the draft rules for that, for the disability section, when they got to the NEC Equalities Committee, and I was appalled to discover there was actually nothing in those rules about reasonable adjustments. And hang on, how can you run a disabled people section without putting in the legal requirements for reasonable adjustments and extra support that disabled people need?
Of course.
I'm not quite sure who wrote that, but
well, it wasn't. It sounds as if it wasn't disabled people that wrote it.
Yeah.
So perhaps that kind of. I'm sure it's an unfortunate omission rather than a deliberate exclusion. So, if the disabled community were much more involved in writing that kind of policy and guidance, then it wouldn't happen, would it? And I think that proves the point of what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're aware that we've actually done a lot in the last 2 years that we've been around as the part of the executive, but we've actually put ourselves forward and volunteered to provide disability assistance to the party and as far as conference is concerned, and did access audits for the conference the last 2 times. However, one of our frustrations with trying to have people understand what is needed is people fall into a trap of not listening to the people who actually have the things. We're far more aware of what needs to be done, and they think that having just book learning, it will cover things, and it's not the case. And it's been a bit of a frustration to find out that the Labour Party is that far behind the times as far as that's concerned.
Yeah. And
sorry, Fran.
It actually doesn't seem to me, and I don't want to simplify the issue, but it doesn't seem to me to be something that's that difficult to resolve.
No.
I think it's just the case it needs to be done and somebody has to take responsibility for it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I think it's very much about a culture of understanding that disabled people have lived experience and probably lived professional experience, which would enable them to do certain roles, which, people say, oh, you're just disabled, that's okay. You can't step up and do a specific role, and I think that's, that can be very difficult for any disabled person to hear, and sadly it's something that both Kathy and I have really struggled against when we've been trying to meet and with some sections of the party.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that, and it shouldn't happen. And let's see if we can get all that sorted. Whoever wins this leadership and deputy leadership contest, the entire party needs to make sure it comes together to sort this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My last two questions are looking at some of the issues around the complaint system. Many disabled people, specifically those with neurodiverse conditions, are adversely affected and impacted within the current very dysfunctional party complaint system. That applies to those who both make complaints and have complaints made against them. Will you agree to work with disabled members to ensure that they are properly supported throughout the whole process by advocates?
Yeah, I mean, what you raise is a very important issue, and in general terms, I've made a commitment as deputy leader that I'll take personal responsibility for all of that grievance, all of those procedures, all of those issues of complaints, because I think it's important that it's not about political interference. There'll be lots of debate about what kind of system you have, whether it be in-house or independent. Really, that misses the point. I think the issue is that someone at the top of the Labour Party, and I think it's the deputy leader, should take that role of making sure that the complaint system is robust, to make sure that it's accessible, to make sure it's fair, to make sure that justice is done properly, and to make sure that particularly people who are requiring to use the system are dealt with compassionately and fairly. So yes, I mean, all the individual parts and all individual components of the complaints process are hugely complex, but you're absolutely right to raise it, and I think the deputy leader has to take all of those on, and I've made the commitment publicly since the very start of this that I'll take personal responsibility for all of that system to make sure not only it works, but people feel as if it works for them.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And my last question is almost a follow on from that. One of the things that I know people have found incredibly frustrating in the current system is that there is, particularly if there are safeguarding issues, is you get very little feedback from the complaints team as to where things are at and what is happening. And when a complaint has been made, whether a member has been suspended or something like that. So, you know, people don't know, but also sometimes when you put in a complaint, it feels as though it goes into a black hole because you don't get a response. We've got members who put in complaints over a year ago, which have still not been responded to. And I wonder what your view would be on that.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't just a Labour Party problem, is it? This is a way that every system seems to work, that the complainants or people that are being complained about feel as if they're excluded from the system and aren't getting the information that's required. And it seems to me just common courtesy to update people and acknowledge where things are in the system, even if it's not something you want to hear. You know, I'm sorry, your case has taken a year, this is why, and we're going to try and resolve it as quickly as possible. It just seems to me to be a common courtesy, and that all goes to the heart of making sure there's a system in place that treats people with fairness and with justice. You know, there are people in the Labour Party who maybe rightly or wrongly but suspended from the party and have been for a long time now. And it just seems to me to be natural justice to have those issues resolved, because if you're innocent till proven guilty, you have to make sure that you're dealing with these issues as quickly as possible. And I think the system, you know, if I'm being completely frank, I don't know entirely how the system operates. I don't know how efficient it is. I've never been through the process myself. But the anecdotal stuff that I do hear is it takes too long, it's cumbersome, and I think the issues that you've raised about the common courtesy of making sure people are fed back properly is important. You're right to say that on some instances, I think that it might be legally inappropriate or difficult to give feedback, but a simple piece of feedback that says, we can't tell you the outcome of this case, but we just want to tell you that it's been concluded, and thank you for drawing it to our attention. Just some kind of courtesy to say that things have been done rather than just leaving them hanging.
Okay, thank you very much. That concludes our questions. I just wanted to give you a couple of minutes to ask if you've got anything you wanted to ask us.
Well, the first thing, I did have a think about this, and the first thing I wanted to ask you both was what your experience was of being a member of the party as a disabled person, if it's got better, and you've raised some issues that I've written down to look at later, but what your sort of lived experiences are of being a member, and if we are heading in the right direction of trying to make it much more conducive for you to be a member, or there is so much more to do. I mean, there is a lot more to do, but whether or not your experiences are still positive in terms of being a member of the party.
I believe from my perspective, in some ways, it has improved. I have to say that we are moving in the right direction, but it's very frustrating because it's different in different areas. So you have vast improvements in some areas that have possibly younger or more progressive members, but where you have the older, more written policy and rules, there's no common sense to deal with it, because we're still saying that it's okay to have a meeting in a pub, because even if it isn't accessible to people who don't drink or have issues around that, or in a working men's club where some women would not necessarily feel comfortable. So just because something's cheap doesn't make it right, and it doesn't make it accessible for you. So I think what we have to do is we have to make the rules and constitutions of individual CLPs match where we want to be now, and say that it's not acceptable to use your constitution or loopholes in your constitution to disenfranchise any member of the Labour Party, and that holding celebrations in somebody's inaccessible back garden, or having it in a pub that doesn't have a disabled toilet, is absolutely unacceptable, and that the party as a whole will not allow that to happen, and that will start to generate an opening of the door wider to enable people to have more access. And also the idea of job sharing. Everything that we suggest, including our disabled activist guide to the Labour Party, which we produced, and we can send you a copy of that, that will give you the ideas that it's, what we're trying to do is, we have the slogan, nothing about us without us, but also it's not them and us, it's us. And we have to look at it as what's good for everybody. And we're more than help, we're here, we have contact details. If you come up, we want MPs to take advantage of us as subject matter experts of lived experience.
Of course.
We're very open, and there is no stupid question. So take advantage of the resource you have. And many of us are very happy to give of our time just to make the changes that need to be made.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, I would really echo what Kathy said. I mean, just a really simple frustration for me today. It is our CLP nominations meeting this evening. I can't get there. And my CLP chair, who is himself disabled, will very happily give me a proxy vote. But the guidance that should have come down from the NEC, that in certain circumstances that can happen, has not gone out to CLPs. So, you know, we're dealing with a really basic issue here, that we've got CLPs who want to be inclusive and supportive, and the party structure is not allowing that. And I think some of it is about education. I do think that all party officials need education in equality access. They don't have any such training at all at the moment, and I think that's a big you know, that's a big gap within the party, because if they understood how the law worked, they would know that currently the party is actually breaking the Equality Act in, you know, in not allowing big meetings, in not allowing proxy votes, in actually making it more difficult for disabled people to, you know, to do things within the party. Yes, it has improved, but we have a long way to go.
Yeah.
And I think also that there has to be one of my personal things that I think has to happen as being a counselor who encountered somebody in a mental health crisis at a public meeting where nobody, including my other colleagues from the council, didn't know how to deal with this woman other than having the police take her and put her in a cell to protect her from herself. But that was a trigger for her, which actually would have made her far more suicidal.
Yeah.
So as a result of that, Fran and I took the mental health first aid course. We have also devised some ideas around inclusion, but we can teach those, and we would offer it to the party, because I think the difference that we have to some instructors is we're within the party and we're disabled. So we kind of have a greater depth of what your constituents, we want every MP and every councillor to have mental health first aid training. And we want to, I think this would go a long way for the party to show that it recognizes that we can be disabled, but we also are professionals and we have skills to bring.
Yeah. Utilize those skills.
Yeah, and we know the problems inside the party. We can tailor education for that, and we would hope that if you're successful, that you can work with us to get that kind of information out, because I think part of the problem is the Labour Party staff believe that they have to control all of this, and they don't understand that in some things we're better placed than going out and getting somebody else to do the training.
Yeah.
Because we know about the rules and regulations within the Labour Party.
Sure.
So that's, you know, that's just something that we would like MPs themselves to take on board, so that when and if we can get this training going, that we do it for everybody who has to face constituents who are suffering with going through a mental health crisis brought on by Tory austerity.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, actually.
I was going to say, I'm going to have to end this now because we're running out of time and I've got a second interview to do. So
I had a really difficult question for you as well, but never mind.
No, go ahead.
No, it's okay. No, I was just going to say, what's the one thing you want to see in a deputy leader of the Labour Party? But I think you've answered that already.
Work with it.
Yeah.
Work with us.
All right. Thank you very much.
It's lovely to see you both.
Really
Yeah,
great.
same here, Ian. And hope to run into you again.
Absolutely. Thank you for giving me your time today. I really appreciate it.
Well,
you're welcome.
You for your time, and please keep in touch with us.
We definitely will. Nice to see you, Fran. Bye,
All right,
Catherine.
thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.